In the late 1960s, New York City's Harlem was a world of its own, an urban tapestry woven together from hope and hardship, a place where the American dream felt just out of reach for so many. Poverty was rampant and opportunities were scarce, but in the shadows a new underworld kingdom had taken root, and its once secretive king now wanted everyone to know who was in charge. When Muhammad Ali met Joe Frazier in the fight of the century at Madison Square Gardens, one figure caught everyone's eye. This mysterious man had better seats than Frank Sinatra, Diana Ross, Barbra Streisand, and even the Vice President Spiro Agnew. But what really riveted onlookers was the $60,000 chinchilla coat he was wearing, which would be worth over $465,000 in 2024 after adjusting for inflation. I could not have people who made less money than me walking around thinking they ruled the world. I screamed it out to all who would listen. Y'all think you gonna outshine me? Bring that ass to New York City, and I will show every last one of y'all who the boss is. These were the words of Frank Lucas, who by that point was one of New York's most powerful drug lords. He had previously operated from the shadows, but on that night, he decided to step out into the open, an action that Lucas would later attribute to his downfall, claiming that his opulent outfit had attracted the attention of law enforcement, and he left that night a marked man. Lucas had been born into poverty in the rural South, but was drawn north, seeking opportunity and fortune. In Harlem, he found both, but through a dark path. The drug trade offered a way up, a path out, and Lucas seized it with both hands, challenging the mafia's dominance and redefining the rules of the criminal underworld. Immortalized in the 2007 film starring Denzel Washington, this is the true story of Frank Lucas, the American gangster. Lucas was born on September 9, 1930 in North Carolina. He grew up near the city of Goldsboro during the height of the Great Depression. The Lucas family lived in poverty, and as Frank entered adolescence, he tried to help support his family, but due to the ongoing economic crisis, it was impossible for him to hold down a job, and so he resorted to stealing money and food from local businesses. He would also hang outside local bars and rob drunks as they left. One night when Lucas was just 12 years old, he was awoken by the sounds of screams. As he went downstairs to investigate, he saw his 14-year-old cousin be shot to death by 5 members of the Ku Klux Klan. Lucas would later claim that this incident was sparked because his cousin had looked flirtatiously at a white woman, and that this motivated him to begin a life of crime. But like many of Lucas's stories, there is no proof other than his word that this actually happened. 3 years later, Lucas got a job as a truck driver, but after his boss discovered that Lucas was having an affair with his daughter, the two got into a fight, where Lucas knocked the man unconscious with a pipe, and then set his business on fire, but not before stealing $500 from the safe. Lucas's mother feared that he'd be sent to prison or worse, and so she convinced him to flee the South and head to New York City. At just 15 years old, Lucas traveled on his own to New York and settled in the neighborhood of Harlem. His mother had pleaded with him to get a job as an elevator operator or a doorman, but he instead continued to engage in petty crime. During his first month in New York, he robbed a jewelry store and broke a security guard's jaw with brass knuckles. He also started dealing drugs, and in one especially brazen move, he pointed a gun at all of the players in a high-stakes poker game and robbed them blind. Lucas's actions could have easily led to him being put 6 feet under, but instead they caught the attention of Bumpy Johnson, the kingpin of Harlem. Johnson controlled all of the illegal gambling in Harlem, and he was also the area's main drug pusher, getting all of his supply from the Italian mob. According to Lucas, Johnson took an interest in him and made him his protege. For the next 15 years he acted as Johnson's driver and right-hand man. One day he even shot a man in the head in broad daylight for reneging on a deal he had made with Johnson. But Johnson's widow disputes this, and instead claims that Lucas stole the life story of a man named Zach Walker, who was Johnson's real right-hand man until he betrayed him and was replaced by Lucas. Either way, after Johnson died of a heart attack in 1968, his empire was completely torn apart by his underlings, who were all eager to get their own piece of the pie. This schism in Harlem's underworld led the Italians to mark up their drug prices by over 200%. At these rates, it would be impossible for any of the dealers in Harlem to make a profit, and Lucas desired to be what he called Donald Trump rich, and so he needed to figure out a way to break the Italians' monopoly on the drug trade. He needed a plan, and in order to formulate one, he would later claim that he locked himself inside his apartment for 2 months, not leaving unless he was picking up food. As Lucas schemed inside his darkened apartment, He realized that the only way he could break the mob's grip on the narcotics trade was to cut them out of the transaction altogether and get his drugs straight from the source. And fortunately for him, he already had a well-placed connection. He remembered a conversation he had previously had with Leslie Atkinson, his cousin's husband, who was an active duty soldier stationed in Southeast Asia. Atkinson was already supplying soldiers with drugs and had told Lucas in the past that the kind of stuff they sold on the streets in New York was trash compared to the purity of the drugs in Asia. Now armed with a plan, Lucas traveled to Bangkok and met with Atkinson inside a bar popular with American soldiers. Atkinson had been in Asia for a long time and was thus already well connected with local opium dealers. After hearing his plan, Atkinson agreed to supply Lucas with the drugs, but Lucas wanted to see the operations for himself. And so the two men traveled for nearly 2 weeks through the jungles of Thailand until they finally reached the several hundred acres of poppy fields controlled by Atkinson's business partner. Lucas met the man and negotiated a deal to buy 132 kilos of high-quality heroin for $4,000 per unit. Back in New York, the mob would have charged him over $50,000 per kilo. Now, the only problem was, how would Lucas smuggle all of these drugs back to New York? To solve this, he created what he later called an army within the army, bribing enlisted men and draftees, as well as officers, to help create a distribution network that was centered on American air bases. Lucas used a combination of expensive bribes and personal charm to recruit his team. The plan was for Lucas's men to load shipments of drugs onto military planes that would then fly back to army bases in the United States. From there, the packages would be unloaded by accomplices who unpacked the drugs and prepared them for sale. To hide the drugs on the planes, Lucas testified that he had a carpenter he knew from North Carolina fly to Bangkok and make 20 replica U.S. military coffins that each had a false bottom where the drugs were hidden. But Atkinson would later claim that the coffin story was entirely made up by Lucas, and what they actually did was smuggle the drugs inside furniture. This was echoed by journalist and crime historian Ron Chepesyuk, who co-authored a biography on Lucas and claimed that there was no evidence of Lucas ever using coffins to transport his drugs, calling it, quote, the biggest hoax in the history of the international drug trade. But either way, Lucas managed to get the drugs clandestinely shipped to the United States from Asia, cutting out the mafia and ensuring that all of the profit went to him alone. Lucas staffed his operation with friends and family exclusively, most notably his 5 younger brothers, ensuring that everyone involved was someone he had known for years, in order to reduce the chances of theft or of someone turning him into the police. Now Lucas was finally able to sell his drugs, which he marketed as Blue Magic because of its high purity. He turned the area of 116th Street in East Harlem into what police called an open-air drug supermarket. Because of its lower price and higher purity, Lucas's Blue Magic quickly dominated the market, making him rich beyond his wildest dreams. Not long after, Lucas was making over $1 million a day, and before long he had over $52 million stashed in various accounts in the Cayman Islands. He also bought numerous legit businesses, including dry cleaners, gas stations, barber shops, and apartment buildings. He even purchased a several thousand-acre cattle ranch in North Carolina. One night during a routine traffic stop, Lucas was caught with over 10 kilos of heroin in his car. He was taken to the police station, and while in the interrogation room, the arresting officers made it clear that they were looking for a bribe. Lucas offered them $30,000, as well as 2 kilos of heroin, which the cops accepted, and he was let go. Such corruption amongst the NYPD was commonplace back then, so much so that Lucas had dozens of cops on his payroll. Even though by this point Lucas was making so much money that he owned property all over the country, he still dressed modestly so as to not attract attention. But as his empire grew, so too did his ego. He began rubbing shoulders with celebrities, and even claimed to have partied with billionaire businessman Howard Hughes. Then came the boxing match discussed in the beginning of the video, when Lucas showed up in his pompous fur coat and sat in a front row seat better than even the vice president could get. Heads were turned, and later that year, Justice Department officials in Essex County, New Jersey, set up a task force to take him down. The task force included Richie Roberts, who was played by Russell Crowe in the film, but according to Chepesyuk, Roberts was a minor figure in the Lucas investigation. The idea that Roberts was the key official in bringing Lucas down is Hollywood's imagination. Indeed, even the real Roberts would later acknowledge that his role in the film had been exaggerated and was instead a composite of dozens of other lawyers and detectives. The task force investigated Lucas for almost 4 years, but because of how his operations were structured, it proved exceedingly difficult to get any evidence against him. However, The case broke wide open after police caught one of Lucas's nephews in a drug sting. Facing a long prison sentence, the nephew agreed to cooperate with police and spilled the beans on Lucas's entire outfit. With this information, they were able to get together enough evidence to take down Lucas's brothers. Then, after Lucas himself unwittingly conducted a drug deal with an undercover cop, in January 1975, over 20 officers raided his house in New Jersey. They also confiscated over $500,000, but Lucas would later reveal that the police had missed over $11 million that he had hidden in the attic. To this day, it is not known what happened to this money, or if Lucas was even telling the truth. He was charged with both federal and New Jersey state drug violations, and would eventually be sentenced to 70 years in prison. But Lucas wasn't about to go to prison for the rest of his life, and so he negotiated a plea deal with the district attorney's office where he agreed to flip and become an informant. Thanks to him, over 100 of his former associates and even 30 family members received long prison terms. Lucas, meanwhile, had his sentence reduced to just 5 years. The film makes the claim that Lucas helped take down tons of corrupt cops, but this is again nothing but Hollywood fiction. As a DEA agent who worked on the case would later say, quote, "He never talked about a dirty cop or a DEA agent. He never gave up anybody like that. It was 100% drug dealers." Just 3 years after his release, Lucas was caught once again dealing drugs. For this, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison and was released in 1991. For the rest of his life, Lucas stayed out of trouble, only having one more brush with the law when in 2012 he pleaded guilty to attempting to cash a $17,000 federal disability benefit check twice. Due to his advanced age and his poor health, prosecutors took pity on him and agreed to a sentence of only 5 years probation. Frank Lucas died on May 30th, 2019 in Cedar Grove, New Jersey from natural causes. And that was the video. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.